everyone. I'm Anna Fisher, and today I want to talk about something I talked about in my previous video, which is how careful historians, good historians are careful historians, and history, we don't necessarily always know what we wish we knew, and sometimes historians are not willing to say XYZ person fit marginalized identity X because we actually don't know enough to say that. And we can frequently say more about what people in the past, in the later past, thought about the earlier past than we can about the earlier past. And that's all true. But we do have another problem, which is that for a very, 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 very long time, the historical community, the historians, the academics, really wanted to disguise the stories of marginalized people, to either strip them out of the narrative or strip out their marginalized status. That is a real thing. First of all, historians had their own biases and prejudices, and also what is talked about by academic historians might not make it into what is taught in schools, for example, or what becomes part of popular history. To this day, in the United States, for example, Texas has a horrifying control over the textbooks that many children outside of Texas get to read, which means that you get a lot of overt racism and Confederate propaganda in those textbooks. What the Texas conservative government wants the children to learn to be historical fact is what they see. And that's deeply horrifying. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these textbooks reflect any kind of academic consensus. In fact, they go directly against that academic consensus. So when you say, oh, these textbooks are horrible, historians are so racist, what you're really saying is, I don't understand how textbooks are made. But at the same time, you also have a long history of course, racist and queerphobic and deeply misogynist historians. That is a real thing. And the histories that people are writing today that are, some historians are still pretty damn racist. Some historians are still pretty damn misogynistic. There is still plenty of that in the academic historian community. So when I say that good historians are careful, and that might not always be, that might be why they're saying, XYZ person we don't know if they were XYZ marginalized identity. Or I'm not willing to go so far as to say XYZ thing about XYZ historical group. You also have the fact that there is definitely still a lot of structural problems with academic history and academic historians. And sometimes the marginalized communities have a different story from the mainline historical consensus, and sometimes that marginalized people's story has been ignored. That is still true. In fact, it happens fairly frequently. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the marginalized community story is right or entirely right. The problem is we have conflicting stories in many different communities, and it's hard to sort out what happened a lot of the time. So what is the popular story of a community might be different from the academic story that academics within that community tend to coalesce around. And it might be very different from the academic consensus of people outside that community. And frequently you have stories where a group is marginalized on some axis and not marginalized on another, and you get some weird things, like you get national histories where all across Eastern Europe you've got great heroic fighters of communism who, by the way, were Nazis, who were Nazi collaborators. And this is something that's kind of all across Eastern Europe right now. That is a known thing. And they say, of course, that anyone arguing that these people are Nazis is, communist propaganda. And the problem is that there was plenty of Soviet propaganda that did talk about how these people were Nazis and tried to discredit the idea of independence on the basis of that. So you end up having, is this a marginalized group fighting a colonialist regime, Soviet Russia? Or are these people, Nazi collaborators? Both. And academic historians tend to come down on the side of both. So you frequently have these cases where you have groups that are, where part of their story might be true, but another part of it might not be. Where you might have parts of oral history that are verifiable and parts that are not. And, a careful historian is going to be careful. But we also have these these historical periods and stories that just are not well looked into, because historians from the dominant identity have just of a group have just not cared about them. So it is a complicated and difficult and very muddy kind of situation. So what does this mean for writers? Always we're going to, go back from the what is interesting academically and talk about what does this mean for fantasy writers? Because, I love history, but I know why you're all here. It's probably to hear me talk about history, because this is definitely a niche channel. So, if you have any kind of character who is being taught about a secret history, and that secret history is the real truth, my eyes glaze over real fast. It's very, very common, especially in urban fantasy. But for me, it tends to go down to this idea that it is possible to have a historical, a complete certainty about historical information, which most of it we just don't, and a lot of it we can't, and historians are always learning more and revising. So it always seems like there's this, yes, the real objective truth that has been hidden from us all, and nobody, has ever known this, and the historians have, completely ignored this or never been able to find out about it. And either it's being deliberately kept secret and everybody is way on board with keeping the secret, or you're going to have historians trying to dig into it. There is no vast conspiracy to keep historical information hidden. There is no vast conspiracy to maintain an academic consensus. That doesn't exist. So anytime you are running across, doing that in your story, maybe think about the implications of a secret history and what that means, and how often conspiracy theories and other forms of misinformation in the real world involve those same tropes, because they really do seem like those tropes kind of pair up really, really, really well to conspiratorial thinking and conspiracy theories. And I find that very interesting. As somebody who, as a Jew, tends to be the focus of a lot of conspiracy theories. A lot of conspiracy theories are basically the Jews run everything. Dig into it, a couple of layers down. The Jews! Yes. So conspiracy theories are very interesting to me, but also, reading fantasy and seeing these same tropes feels very strange, because I so strongly associate those tropes with conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism. So if you are going to be sort of going into this conspiratorial thinking in your world, consider the implications and consider maybe figuring out another way to get that across without doing that, or dig into it and commit. Either way, know what you're doing and write more intentionally and thoughtfully. And I would love to see more commitment to this idea and what it means. And I wish you all very well in your writing journeys and in your reading journeys. And if you have noticed that same kind of conspiratorial thread in fantasy, especially urban fantasy. Anyway, I'm Anna Fisher. My social media links are in the description below. If you liked this video or found it useful, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel and clicking that little notification bell, and possibly even leaving me a comment. I hope you had a lovely day so far, and if it hasn't been lovely so far, I hope it gets better soon. Thank you, and bye-bye for now.